tornadoes, of floods, all different situations. Heavenly Father, we ask that you bless and comfort those people. Thank you for the church here, and be with us as we go to the classes. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Wish to go to classes.
Good morning, everyone. It's good to have everyone here this morning. You're online. We're happy to have you along with us also. We're studying out of the book of John, chapter 11. Apologize for the frog here this morning. John chapter 11. If my notes are correct, I think we left off with about verse 35 last week. So we'll kind of begin there in that area. Good to have everyone with us this morning. Good number in attendance here. As I said, those are online. We're happy to have you with us. We're continuing our study here. We have a situation here where Jesus has been notified that his good friend Lazarus had become sick, and as we talked about the last couple of weeks, that now he has made his way to Bethany, where Lazarus and his sisters lived, and we find out that Lazarus had passed away. And we had a lot of good discussion concerning that last week. He has taken his disciples with him to Bethany. They arrive at Bethany. Martha runs out to meet him and makes the statement that if you had been here, my brother would not have died. And then also verse 22, but I know that even now God will do whatever you ask. So we had that discussion here about Martha's particular conversation with Jesus here, and the way that she approached Jesus, and that he goes and he reassures her. He says that I am the resurrection and the life. He who believes in me will live even though he dies, and whoever lives and believes in me will never die. Do you believe this? So there was a question there that Jesus was posing back to Martha. And of course she answers, yes, Lord, I do believe that you are the Christ, the Son of the living God, or the Son of God who has come into the world. We had related that to Peter's confession back in, I think it's Matthew chapter 16, where they asked, Jesus asked, who do men say that I am? And they respond back, or Peter responds back, you are the Son of God. So there, we go on from there, and then Martha goes to see Mary at the latter part of verse 28, and she tells Mary, who is back at the house in Bethany, mourning and all with the other friends and family members who was gathered there to mourn Lazarus, that Jesus had arrived, and his followers, his disciples. And she quickly got up and went out and followed him. This is in verse 31. Quickly got up, and they followed her, supposing that she was going to the tomb. And then when she reaches Jesus in verse 32, when Mary reached the place where Jesus was, and again, this was not in the town. They had left and gone out to meet Jesus someplace in the area there. She fell at his feet. And she said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. So basically the same thing that Martha had said to Jesus earlier. Maybe they had that conversation because she went back, Martha went back and, as I said, told Mary that Jesus was here, and it was in private. That was at a kind of a private conversation between them. So maybe they had discussed this, that knowing that Jesus had the power and who that Jesus was. She answers, makes the statement, the same thing that Martha said, Lord, if you'd been here, my brother would not have died. Then in verse 33, and that's kind of where we kind of left off, 33, 34, and 35, we kind of hurriedly, because the first bell had already rung at that time, hurriedly through this, but it's something very important, I think, that we need to look at. And when Jesus saw her, in verse 33, saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her also weeping, he was deeply moved in the spirit and troubled. The weeping, the term here, as we look at this term, where Jesus saw her weeping and the Jews who had come along with her weeping, both, this was almost like a wailing from what the Greek word that's used here, and I don't know Greek, and you know I don't know Greek, but I sometimes speak in Greek, Debbie says, but anyway, the word that's used here, according to the commentators, is that this is a word that it's not just a crying, it's not like, a sobbing, it is a wailing. I mean, they are, we've all probably experienced that or have had seen that, experienced others who have had that, where it's just your emotions are just so raw and so out there that they are, it's just like a loss of control in that. And that's what Mary and those who were with her, Mary and Martha, those who were with her were doing. And it really affected Jesus. He was deeply moved and in spirit and troubled. And again, some of the commentators say that, we say that when he's moved or he's troubled, I've always assumed this, that it's just that he is emotional because if he sees what's going on. He sees the loss that they are experiencing, the trauma that they're going through. And so as we see other people who go through this, we kind of feel that, don't we? We feel that part of that. But from what commentators say, that the word that is used here is really that Jesus is almost angry, not at them, but he is angry at what death can do to people. And he is angry. He knows who is the master of death, and that's Satan. Satan has that power to rob people of life. And he is angry and he sees what's happened, what is being done to these people that he loves, that he has emotional contact and relationship with. And it's almost, they say the word here is almost that he makes a sound when it says that he groans, as later on it says he groans in his spirit, that it's almost a guttural type of, it's that kind of thing that he's emotional about what is taking place here. He's like I said, almost like an anger type of thing is what's going on. So when he was deeply moved in the spirit, he was moved in the spirit, deeply moved in the spirit, and troubled. Then he says here in verse 30, any comments? When I mentioned those things, like I said, I just always kind of read that, and you read through it, and you always concentrate on verse 34. Isn't that what the shortest verse in the Bible, which I think is not really the shortest verse. I think there's one verse that only has one word in it. I don't remember where it is, but anyway, Jesus wept, and we always concentrate on that. Jesus wept, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing wrong with concentrating on that, because that shows the emotional aspect of Jesus and how important it was for him to see and to be a part of what's going on. So I'm not taking anything away from that when I say that he was upset to the point of being angry. Kip?
And your comments you made about the wailing as opposed to weeping, that would be typical for you know it.
Yeah.
He'll let you know.
Yeah. So the wailing part is, just a part of their human nature. And as I said, it even with us. I mean, when things happen like that, a loss, a death of a loved one, and you get to the point where you just kind of, like I said, lose that and lose that control, and it just becomes that. But I appreciate your comments, because it is, the wailing wall, for instance, that we read about and hear about. So Jesus wept. All right, he cried, but it was this word that is used here, wept. The Greek word here is translated that it was a controlled cry. I mean, it wasn't out of control like the wailing that we talk about or that we read about here earlier. It is a under control, but yet moving type of crying. He wept. Okay. I think it's interesting. Like I said, we don't want to pass over that. We don't want to take anything away from that. Someone would like to turn over to Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, and then also Hebrews chapter 5 and verse 7. Because I think it's important that we understand what these verses can bring to light to this particular incident that's happened here. Hebrews chapter 4 and verse 15, and then Hebrews 5 and verse 7. Someone like to read? We've got Alan's got 15, and Eldon, will you take? Sorry here. Alan's got 4:15, and Eldon, will you take 5 and 7? Hebrews 5 and verse 7. Okay, Alan.
For we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but in all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin.
Okay, in 15. Oh, that is 15.
That is 15.
I'm sorry. I'm looking at 14. Excuse me, Alan.
You want me to read 14?
Well, 14 is where I was. Yeah, I'm
Okay.
sorry. Yeah.
Seeing then that we have a great high priest that is passed unto the heavens, Jesus, the Son of our God, let us hold fast our profession.
Okay. All right.
And in 15,
15.
for we have not a high priest which cannot be touched with the feelings of our infirmities, but as all points tempted like as we are, yet without sin.
Okay. Thank you, Alan. I'm sorry to confuse. So, I mean, there again, that is an important statement there, because we see here, don't we? We see that Jesus is being touched. He is being moved. He's been emotionally moved about what has taken place here. It's a friend. It's a close friend. And he sees what's happening there. Eldon, and then you have chapter 5 and verse 7.
Who in the days of his flesh, when he had offered up prayers and supplications with strong crying and tears unto him that was able to save him from death, and was heard in that he feared.
Okay. Here again, we see that Jesus, during the days of Jesus' life on earth, he offered up prayers and petitions with loud cries and tears. In other words, Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Jesus was touched with the things that were going on about him. He cried in the garden. He wept in the garden. And this verse kind of relates to that. He was crying out to God. He was weeping, about what was going to take place, what he was going to be going through. So we have a Savior. We have a God that can be moved and can be touched with the things and knows what we go through and what we experience. And that's exactly what he was showing when he was going through this with Mary, Martha, and those that were gathered with it, his disciples, and also those of friends and family. He wept. He wasn't ashamed of weeping. Sometimes, you know what? A lot of us grew up, and a lot of us grow up thinking that, a man should not cry. It's unwritten rule, But if Jesus can cry when he's moved, then I don't see any reason why we should feel that we can't. Some of us don't. I think I remember one time seeing my dad cry. One time. And, that's not to say anything against the person. Some people aren't moved in that way. And they're not moved in a way that shows, okay? They may be moved in their heart. They may have deep feelings of what's happened or whatever, but for some reason they don't show it, in a physical way of crying. So that's either way. There's nothing wrong with that. But I think we get this, the stigma that's put upon, men is that if you cry, you're not a real man. And I'd rather follow in the footsteps of Jesus as to not. But that doesn't mean if you don't, that doesn't mean you're not following either. So I'm just saying that that's just kind of a thing that we kind of look at as a measurement of our manhood, okay? So anyway, that's just a little commentary there. Any comments from anyone else? All right, so then we see here in verse 36, and the Jews said, see how he loved him. In other words, they could tell by what he was doing, him weeping, him being emotionally moved, that they could see the love that he had for Lazarus and for those. But then in verse 37, but some of them said, could not he have opened the eyes of the blind, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? And I don't know, again, here we talked last week about the way things are written, and maybe if somebody's an English person, they can look at that and see the way it's written as to what kind of response that is. I don't know if they were saying like in a sarcastic way, well, couldn't, it just said some of them, it doesn't say all of them, but in a way, is could not the one who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? So either way you look at it, I'm just saying, it's just whether or not, what kind of tone, what kind of, you look at it in context, and of course, they were all being moved, and they were all being disturbed by what was going on, they were all sad, so I leaned the way that it's just, I just wished he would have been able to do that. He had the power to heal the blind man. They were aware of that either by being there, it may have been some of his disciples, it could have been others, it could have been just word of mouth, knowing that what he had done. Remember, we had said how important that was and how much of that no one had ever done that before when he healed the man born blind, that we talked back in chapter 9. But anyway, so that, just whatever being said there.
Dan, that's what makes this such an interesting response, because they didn't make reference to, well, hasn't he raised the dead before or anything like that. So none of these people had ever seen a person being raised from the dead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But they were saying, well, since he can do these other miracles, couldn't do this. But I think you're right, there might be a sense of sarcasm to you just
I would think it
can't know
would be
it all.
the same concept as Mary and Martha. He has the power, so why didn't he?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, just a human response, And he doesn't say, they said kept him from dying. In other words, it's not that he hasn't raised him from the dead yet, but it's just that, what?
He could have healed him.
He could have healed him.
I mean, again, like they've said, if you'd have been here, he would have died.
Mm-hmm.
In the same way with what they're talking about, if he had have been here, he could have. Because I don't think they even, at this point, are even thinking about raising from the dead.
Yeah.
No.
No.
I mean, at this juncture.
Yeah.
But healing him before he would have died.
Yeah, because back when Martha had that early discussion with Jesus, she said, I know, Lord, that I know that there's going to be a resurrection day. I know he's going to rise from the dead then, as believers. So yeah, I agree with you that is, and he could have done. He had raised people like you mentioned. He had raised two others: the widow's son, and Jairus' daughter. He had raised other people from the dead. But anyway, Kim, you got a comment?
I just, in this whole passage, starting with Martha, you're seeing a whole range of emotion. Martha comes out strong and shows her faith, finally. Whereas Mary, she's humble, she falls down and weeps. You don't see Martha, it doesn't say anything about Martha weeping at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And then, and to me, when I read that verse 37, it almost sounds like confusion. They're believers because they saw him heal the blind, and could be some sarcasm in there in some of them, but it's just, I think, some sort of sincere confusion.
Yeah.
And it kind of, it's a great lead into the rest of the story.
Yeah, 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 for sure.
You know, you think of a funeral today of somebody's passed away. There's, within all the people that come to the wake and visitation, there's all kind of feelings. You know, one of the most prevalent ones is somebody said, why did God let this happen? You know, where some of them say, well, he's with God now. He's, you know, he's at peace now.
Yeah.
I mean, it's even today, at a funeral today with the public, there's all types of mixed emotions, and that's what the Bible is showing right here. It's not showing a one-sided opinion of something. You know, it's showing all the human emotions here.
Yeah, yeah, I think you're right. Exactly. Yeah, I like what you said, kid, too, about Martha. You know, it's Mary, you know, that does all the, at least it's, John is relating to us what Mary was going through, more so than what Martha was going through, you know. So I think that's interesting there to look at it that way, too. But yeah, all the emotions are going through these people, and each thing is different, and each one handles it differently. And even just in this period of time, we don't know how long this is taking. You know, whether it's hours, whether it's minutes, we have no idea here. We read it in just like it's going on right away, but we don't know what actually took place and how long it took place. So, but I think we're all kind of in agreement there that it's mixed emotions going on through these individuals. All right, so then going into this next section here, verse 38. Jesus, once more deeply moved, came to the tomb. Did I say a while ago I don't know if I mentioned or read, where have you laid him? Jesus asked. Okay, that's back up in 34. After he, was troubled and moved in the spirit, he said, where have you laid him? So, he's wanting to know. Okay, so they're apparently on the move. They're going to go there. And so that's what they did. And then in verse 38, once more, deeply moved, Jesus was deeply moved, came to the tomb, and it was a cave with a stone laid across it at the entrance. Okay? Again, the deeply moved part. In other words, this is the second time that this particular statement is being made. Jesus once more was deeply moved. He was moved back earlier, and now, again, this same kind of emotion is coming over him. It was at a cave with a stone laid across the entrance, and he says, take away the stone. Interesting here, I don't know, we've all, when we talk about Jesus' burial, we talk about, the possibility of a stone. I think this was kind of a normal custom that, it was usually a burial site or tomb was not what we normally think of as a place where that's in the ground. It's most of the time, from what I understand here, is that it's in an area or a cave or whatever that has an opening or has been hewn out or been opened up in an area where they can put the body and then seal it with a stone. And that's kind of, brings back the thought about Jesus and the same thing that was done with him, is they rolled the stone in front of Jesus' tomb as well. You wonder if Jesus is kind of like in, having the power to understand and know the future, if this brings up even like what he's going to be going through in a few short, actually probably within weeks or days, depending on the time frame between this event and where he goes back in for the Passover later. But anyway, so it's just when you read that, rolled away, take away the stone, he said. Then Martha's reply, here we have Martha again, but Lord, Martha, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been dead or been there for 4 days. We talked a little bit about this last week, maybe a week before, about the thought that the Jews had that the body, a person who had died, they had this thought that the spirit lingered for 3 days, just in case, for whatever reason, that it may be able to re-enter. There's no scriptural reference, nothing like that. But this is again, part of their thinking. Some of the Jews thought this, okay? So 4 days, and she says, Lord, there's going to be an odor here, okay? the thing about this is that, they would not embalm as we do today, or as even back in the day then the Egyptians would embalm and then mummify. They would take the body and they would wash and they would do all that, and they would put different fragrances, different types of things to kind of preserve in a way the odor from coming on right on, and then they would wrap the body in sheets or wrap them up. And so Martha is just saying here, of course Jesus would realize that, they would all realize that, but she's saying, wait a minute, there's going to be a smell here. He had been dead for 4 days. Then Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believed, you would see the glory of God? And so he recalls or brings back to her memory what had basically the conversation that had taken place earlier. We're talking about the resurrection, where he said that he will rise again, and that those who believe in Christ, the Son of God, would also rise. And so he recalls that to her, just kind of reassure her that it's not all of death to die, but that he had the power to do this, and he's going to demonstrate that for sure. So they took away the stone. They listened to what he says. Verse 41, they took away the stone. Then Jesus looked up and said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. This is interesting here. Apparently, Jesus had prayed, not in a verbal sense here where they'd hear him pray, but he is responding to God because he knew what God was able to do, or what he had given Jesus the power to raise Lazarus from the dead. So he says this out where everyone can hear him. He said, I thank you that you have heard me. And then in verse 42, I knew that you'd always hear me, but I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. In other words, he's acknowledging to God so that those around about him, he's giving God the credit. Those around about him then can understand that it's not all of him, but it's because of the power that he has that God has granted him. So he's doing this for their benefit. God had answered his prayer. He knew that he'd answered the prayer. But then for the benefit of those around about him, he made this statement so that they may believe. In other words, it's an opportunity again for Jesus to demonstrate not only that what he's going to do will cause others to believe, but that he had this conversation that he was able to communicate, and God was communicating with him, so that they may believe. So their faith would be reassured, by him doing this publicly. And sometimes we do that, don't we? Not that we give God the glory publicly for something that has been done, maybe for the benefit of those around about us. Not that bring any glory to us, but that it acknowledges an answered prayer. When we have prayer and singing night on the fifth Sundays, there's times that we say, we thank you for answered prayer. We know that you've answered these prayers in a public sense. And so it assures or reassures us that God does hear prayers and that he answers those prayers. And so he did this for their benefit. Any comments from anybody up to this point? Okay. Then, verse 43. When he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, Lazarus, come out. In other words, it's not like Lazarus, come out. We see it here with an exclamation point. We said, last week we were talking about when we text or we email or whatever, we put the exclamation points on it. Jesus is to the point where we talk about in a loud voice, almost to the point of screaming, in Lazarus. He wanted the people to hear. It wasn't that that Lazarus would not hear him if he didn't even have to say anything. Jesus didn't have to say anything about Lazarus come out. He didn't have to do that. But he did that, again, for those people to be able to hear and to be influenced under by what he said. So he says, Lazarus, come out. He screams it out, Lazarus, come out. Someone made the comment that if he didn't use the word Lazarus, if there were other people in the near area that had been, if this was like a cemetery thing, that if he'd have just said come out, maybe everybody would have. So I know that's kind of been, I've heard that said before anyway in jest. But this is a serious thing. But I'm just saying, he makes it known that he is talking to Lazarus, okay? And he tells him to come out. The dead man, in verse 44, came out with his hands, his feet, wrapped in the strips of linen and the cloth around his face. Again, this, talks about how the people were buried at that time. And so they had prepared the body. They had done everything that the Jews were accustomed to doing for someone. So he comes out exactly like he was buried, even around with the cloth that was around his face. So don't know how he got out. I mean, I don't know how tightly they bound him. I mean, it's kind of, you think about that, if it was, kind of walking like this, or if it was how. Anyway, he comes out. And he still has the grave clothes on him here. So, I mean, can you imagine what they would have thought? Can you imagine the shock and awe and the excitement and all that was going through them? We talked about all the emotions that that was going through them at this time. And then he says, Lazarus, come out. I mean, they're expecting. Think back. They're probably expecting. They roll the stone away. They don't know what he's going to do. They roll the stone away. They maybe thought, Martha definitely thought, Lord, he's going to smell. If you're going in to kind of get one look at him he's going to smell. And they were expecting probably that he was just going in to see Lazarus one last time. But yet, whenever he makes this loud statement, how much of a shock that would be to them. And then Lazarus actually comes out. Yep. Lori?
I had the thought, you talked about the fact that, Jairus' daughter and the woman's son, that, he had raised the both of them. Mm-hmm. But they pretty much just died. And I'm sure there were probably naysayers who would say, well, they weren't really dead. They were just, almost dead or something. Mm-hmm. And, 4 days. There couldn't be any doubt in anybody's mind. And I've often wondered, did it smell when they opened up the tomb? Was there a smell? But I bet there was, because he would have had to prove, this was kind of the whole thing, was to prove this man had been dead for 4 days. Yeah. And yet I raised him. Yeah. And, so it's just putting that little extra emphasis on that.
That's a great point. He probably did have, it doesn't say that Jesus miraculously changed his body of any sense of that. It's just that he probably did. He probably came out just looking like he had been dead for 4 days. What else could So, again, that's a good point. The shock that this had taken place, even though 2 other people had been raised from the dead, that's a good point that he had been dead 4 days. So almost another statement, another emphasis on the fact. Yeah, David?
Today's time, it's kind of like, as you can see where she asks the question in verse 33 to 39, that Martha said, but Lord, the sister of by this time there was a bad odor. Can you imagine now that was going on? We went through the cemetery, pulled the grave back up after 4 days. There's going to be a mixture of caution, like, do you know what you're doing, to curiosity, to all kind of things. Yeah. Almost a little bit of, it doesn't say it, but maybe a little bit of, what's the word I'm looking for, not anger, but disrespect or something.
Sure. Yeah. That's a good point. That possibly was going on. They were thinking all these different things. And, do you know really what you're doing? And, I think this could be a range of emotions that were taking place here when this was happening. Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. Alan?
I wonder how many of them were scared. Mm-hmm. I hate saying this, it's kind of comical, but I can remember the old movies, the old horror movies, we had the money, and when they'd come out, I'm just wondering how many people was expecting this and what they, it doesn't say anything about the emotions of the people, but part of them had to say just about want to run off. Yeah. To a certain degree.
Yeah. It's a good point. It's not, I don't think you're being at all.
Yeah.
You know, disrespectful. I mean, really, these are things that we don't really, you don't think about it. When you read, I mean, I've read this, we've all read this over and over, but when you start really getting into each of these little things, there's these nuggets here of things that are taking place, that yeah, you're wondering if there's some people that are like shocked. Well, look what Peter, the disciples, whenever Jesus was walking on the water, and they thought there was a ghost, you know. I mean, they were afraid. They were fearful of what was going on. And they see this individual coming out on the water. Can you imagine what they were experiencing here? So, yeah, Kim, I think, did you have your hand up, I think?
Yeah, I'll make a comment. Years ago, I watched a movie called The Last Temptation of Christ. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. It had a lot of publicity. But it put an interesting twist on this story of Lazarus. Because after he had been raised from the dead, he was sitting there doing something. I can't remember what. He was obviously very grumpy. And I think it was Peter or one of the apostles came up to him and said, Lazarus, why are you so upset? He said, why shouldn't I be upset? He said, we were dead and you've been raised up. He said, yeah, I was in paradise. Why would I want to come back here?
I mean, that is a thought. That is a...
Whoever put that together, that was
Yeah.
interesting. But I got a feeling he was happy.
Oh, yeah, I think so too. But I mean, I think we've all, I mean, I've heard it said before, it's like, you know, he's going to have to go through this all again, you know? I mean, it's good. And we'll see as we get into down further in the chapter, it's not going to be an easy life. Okay? I mean, for Lazarus, I'm saying. Because of, well, we'll get into that. We'll kind of have a cliffhanger here. The first bell's rung. All right, so anyway, they removed the strips. Jesus said to them, take off the grave clothes and let him go. I mean, isn't that symbolic of our death, burial, and resurrection when we're obedient to the gospel? I mean, take off the old sin, take off the old stuff, and just let him go. And that's what he tells them to do. Just for reference, there's only been 2 other times, at least that I could find, and as I searched, that other than what Jesus did, the 2 that we talked about, raising of the dead, but there was also in the Old Testament, Elijah and Elisha had both raised people from the dead in a different sense. I mean, they were raised from the dead, but that's found in 2 Kings in chapter 4, and then 2 Kings chapter 13. Where they were able to raise somebody from the. I'm sorry, 1 Kings chapter 17 and 2 Kings chapter 4, where Elijah and Elisha raised someone from the dead. So anyway, so now we hear that he has risen. That he's told them to take off the grave clothes, and then beginning in verse 45, as some of your Bibles might say, the plot to kill Jesus. Okay, they now are really upset. All right, Marilyn?
Before you go on.
Yes.
I just happened to think, the Jews had rules about handling dead people.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And so see, there's another element of their fear for opening that grave. Doesn't say it, but.
Yeah, that's a great point. Never thought about that. Yeah, that it was against the Jewish law, wasn't it, about certain things that they were to do with the dead and so on.
I don't know the exact thing about.
Yeah. That would probably come into play also. Good point. Very good point. All righty. Well, the second bell is going to get ready to ring. So let's just let's look at verse 45. So therefore, many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did put their faith in him. Okay, this had a result that Jesus was wanting it to have. Many of the Jews that had come to be with Mary, to visit with Mary, had seen what Jesus did and put her faith in him. Verse 46, but some of them went to the Pharisees and told them what Jesus had done. I mean, what more could Jesus do? But yet, did everybody believe? No. I mean, here is a man dead 4 days. Jesus raises him from the dead. Some believe, and yet some don't. And isn't that reminiscent of all the different, I know we've gone back a long time of this, but Jesus does a miracle, some believe, some don't. Jesus does another miracle, some believe, some don't. And here, raising him from the dead, and some believe and some don't. And they go tell. They go tell the Pharisees. And
it's amazing how raising somebody from the dead can be a threat.
Yeah. Well, we're going to we'll begin in verse 45 or 46 next week, and we'll see what ends up happening. Remember I said it's not going to be easy life for Lazarus according to what we read here. So we'll talk about that next week. Appreciate your comments.